I'm very grateful to have today here Dr. John Demartini. I think from the past years, you are the person from whom I learned the most about the universe, the mind, the human psychology.
A universal law, obviously what the term means, would be applying in the micro world, the macro world, and anywhere in between. And as far as we can observe through microscopes or telescopes, there are principles and laws that seem to apply. Our lower subcortical area of our brain tends to dualize things, and the higher, more executive function tends to synthesize things. So synthesis gives us more governance and order, and the duality and the separations tend to make us disempowered. So I try to teach people how to ask questions so they can be conscious of both sides. There's a deep gratitude and really a synchronicity in the brain that occurs that brings a tear of appreciation that's deeper than the superficial gratitude that most people are accustomed to. So it's easy to say thank you, thank you, thank you when somebody's doing something that supports your values. But can you go in there and find out the things that are challenging you, how does that serve you, and discover the hidden order in that? Then you have a gratitude that's even more profound. So I'm interested in that gratitude. I'm not interested in the infatuation that many people call love. I'm interested in the love when you see the order of what's happening and you see that you need both of the sides, the supportive and challenging sides, to make sure you grow. And when you can love that and appreciate that, that's the deep gratitude and love that I'm interested in helping people. Until you can manage your emotions, don't expect to manage money. So the hierarchy of one's values will dictate their financial destiny. If a person has a low value on wealth building, they're not likely to accumulate wealth. I've interviewed people. I've been studying values for 45 years of the 51 years I've been teaching, and I've interviewed a lot of people and looked at their values and looked at wealthy people's values and poor people's values. And there's no question in my mind that the people that have accumulate wealth have a different set of values. They have a higher value on, serving, investing, and accumulating, where the other one has more of immediate gratification, consumables, and other things in their life. If you don't put your money aside first and bring order to money, unexpected bills and entropy take it over. That's why the wealthy pay themselves first, not last. If you pay yourself first and invest, you attract more opportunities to make, because money goes in the economy to those who have the most order around it. And the people that pay themselves last and wait to see if there's extra, they always have unexpected bills that erode it, and they can't seem to get ahead. So I learned that was a major gift that moment. And have time run our lives, which is aging. If we can see both sides simultaneously and see that there's a benefit and a drawback, and so ultimately it's balanced synchronously at the same time, we have the most profound wisdom, and we don't emotionally react. We don't have a fear of losing that which we infatuate with, or fear of gaining of that which we resent. We're present, and they have the most resilient, because the inability to adapt to a changing environment is what's distress. And the reason why we have difficulty adapting is because we're fearing the loss of that which we seek and fearing the gain of that which we try to avoid. If we're not seeking and avoiding, and we're just present. So I realize that if you take everybody else's expectations that are projected onto you and try to please all those people, you'll scatter yourself with chronic fatigue syndrome. But if you actually find out what's really meaningful to you and give yourself permission to prioritize your life and say thank you but no thank you, there's an art of saying thank you but no thank you to other people, and get onto it. And then find a way of doing something that really is meaningful to you in a way that serves people. And to me, gratitude and love of the heart, certainty and presence and inspiration and enthusiasm, this is the core of the things that I'm trying to help people master in their life. There's no universal meaning and purpose that I see other than the pursuit of the synthesis and synchronicity of opposites, which I've defined as love. So everybody's pursuing unconsciously or consciously this thing that they feel is most meaningful and loving for them.
I'm very grateful to have today here Dr. John Demartini. I think from the past years, you are the person from whom I learned the most about the universe, the mind, the human psychology, and I'm very grateful that I can have you here in this interview, in this amazing place. If you allow me to introduce you in a few words, John Demartini is a polymath and the world-renowned human behavior specialist. His work has been described by his students as an extensive library of wisdom, which I can confirm 100%. John Demartini's mission and vision is to share knowledge and wisdom that empowers you to become a master of your own life and destiny. His education curriculum ranges from personal growth seminars to corporate empowerment programs. His teachings are the synthesis and knowledge and wisdom from the greatest minds through history, and his curriculum is designed to help you empower and inspire all 7 areas of life. My great pleasure to have you here and my greatest gratitude.
Thank you.
John, if you're open, I would like to start to talk about universal laws. What are they and why are they important to be known by human beings?
A universal law, obviously what the term means, would be applying in the micro world, the macro world, and anywhere in between. And as far as we can observe through microscopes or telescopes, they're principles and laws that seem to apply. And the value of them is that nobody violates those. Human laws, rarely do people completely live by, but universal laws nobody violates. So if we organize our life along those lines, we have a higher probability of achieving and fulfilling our lives than if we are constrained by the limitations of human computation and awareness. So, yeah, there's a difference between just a human law and a universal law. A universal law of gravity, if you jump off a building, no matter what the rules are of the human, you're going to probably fall to the earth. And, if you have a certain temperature, you're probably going to burn. There's certain things that that are probable. And I would rather have my basis for teaching based on universal laws, things that will stand the test of time, than something that is transient and variable through time and space with human needs. So I'm a firm believer in identifying what those are and try to share those with people and make them practical so they can put them into their life and use them wisely.
Would it be correct if we said that you were the one who took these universal laws from sciences and applied them to human psychology?
That's been my objective. In physiology, psychology, sociology, and theology, there was a lot of bias, a lot of sort of a pseudoscience in some respects. It was never an absolute science. Mathematics is more of a rigor. And so I wanted to create a more rigorous approach to those 4 fields. And psychology was definitely one of them. I wanted to figure out, when you have psychological illnesses and issues, how do we actually solve them and with duplicatable and transferable information? The same thing in physiology, same thing in social functions, and even in theology. So, yeah, I wanted to apply the universal principles to those areas and have a universal scheme that if somebody understood those principles, they would be able to apply them to those areas, because those are what I call the 4 opiums of the masses. They sell the idea of health without disease, happy without sad, harmony without disharmony, and heaven without hell. And they polarize people and divide people up instead of integrate people and empower them. So I wanted to come back and, tweak those areas and come up with something that's duplicatable that could help people really feel in line with the universe and also empower those areas of their life.
One of the laws that really changed my perspective about life was the law of duality. Would you define it and share some perspectives about the law of duality, please?
The law of duality has been stated by various cultures and thinkers, the Greeks, the Chinese. In China, they called it the yin and yang. The Taoists had it as a pair of opposites. Heraclitus in the Greek philosophy had the idea of unity of opposites. And that, if there's hot, there's cold. If there's warm, there's cool. If there's loud, there's soft-spoken. These are pairs of opposites, or contrast. And they come together as pairs. So the second you meet somebody that you think is very intelligent, relative to that, you think somebody else may be ignorant. There's a contrast there. And by the law of contrast, we split people up and judge people accordingly. And this, in a sense, disempowers us. When we infatuate with somebody, they occupy space and time in our mind and run us. When we resent somebody, they occupy space and time and run us. When we see the balance and don't put them into a polarity of a duality, we run ourselves. So I teach people how to find the equal and opposite in people So they're not judging people with misinformation and subjective bias. They see both sides simultaneous, and this re-empowers them, and they have more reflective awareness than deflection. So duality is our lower subcortical area of our brain tends to dualize things, and the higher, more executive function tends to synthesize things. So synthesis gives us more governance and order, and the duality and the separations tend to make us disempowered. So I try to teach people how to ask questions so they can be conscious of both sides, both poles of the contrast of pairs of opposites at the same time, so they empower their life.
Can I play the devil's advocate here? Because if someone hears that and then we work with trauma using the law of duality, there is a label there that a bad thing happened. And then if you go with the process, with the Demartini method, through the process, and you realize that that was perfection, there is a way of being afraid of labeling that as being a good thing. So how do you manage this?
Well, it's neither good nor evil. It's an event. The fact is that whatever you labeled trauma is an event that actually occurred. But the label you gave it, trauma, means that you chose to see only the downsides. And the event has both sides. But if we see the downsides more than the upsides, we call it traumatic. If we see the upsides more than the downside, we call it terrific. It's neutral. As John Milton said, we can make a heaven out of a hell or a hell out of a heaven. Our thinking makes it so. So the willingness to ask a new set of questions and reveal to our conscious awareness the side that we're ignoring when we label it terrible. And then it turns out to be having terrific and terrible at the same time. But it's not, something that's bad is not good, and something's good is not bad. Something that is happening is neutral until you bias that and label it bad or good. So I try to teach people how to ask questions to make them aware of the other side that they're ignoring. And the second they center themselves and see both sides, it doesn't run their life. They run their life. So it's not what happens to them, it's their perception, decisions, and actions from that. So I teach people how to be resourceful, because otherwise they're victims of history. They're victims of whatever happens out there, instead of masters of destiny by taking command of their perceptions of what happened.
And the point you are taking the persons who you work with is the point of gratitude, the place of gratitude and love. So the place of gratitude and love, it's not a place of good, the opposite of bad. It's just being grateful for what happened and being able to not being run by the event, by understanding the meaning of it deeply at the cellular level, at the level of a cell.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
Yeah. An event, there are two types of gratitude the way I look at it. There's a superficial gratitude where your amygdala wants to avoid a pain and seek a pleasure, and then somebody does something that's pleasurable to you and you say thank you. And that's a simple superficial gratitude that anybody can demonstrate. Even animals will put on a fluffiness if you do something that they want. And then there's a deep gratitude that when things are challenging you, and then you find out how it served you, you find the hidden order in it, you might say. And now you see the benefits of both sides simultaneously. There's a deep gratitude and really a synchronicity in the brain that occurs that brings a tear of appreciation that's deeper than the superficial gratitude that most people are accustomed to. So it's easy to say thank you, thank you, thank you when somebody's doing something that supports your values. But can you go in there and find out the things that are challenging you, how does that serve you, and discover the hidden order in that? Then you have a gratitude that's even more profound. So I'm interested in that gratitude. I'm not interested in the infatuation that many people call love. I'm interested in the love when you see the order of what's happening and you see that you need both of the sides, the supportive and challenging sides, to make sure you grow. And when you can love that and appreciate that, that's the deep gratitude and love that I'm interested in and helping people obtain.
We'll come back to this. Before we go there, I would like to ask you a question about occupying space and time in your mind. You said that when you see only support or you see only challenge, that occupies space and time in your mind. Would you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. Most people can relate to it in this way. They're getting ready to go to bed, and during the day or that evening, they may have met with somebody that they were highly infatuated with and all enamored with and excited about and elated about. And they create a fantasy in their mind about where that relationship's going to go. And they try to sleep and they're fantasizing all night and They have the things that they admire occupy space and time in their mind, and it's very intrusive in their thinking, and it occupies their night, and they can't sleep. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they've had a really challenging thing that they don't see the upsides to, the benefits to, and they resent somebody, and then they're angry and revengeful, and they try to sleep. They can't sleep. Anytime they see way more positives than negatives and they're blind to the downsides, or way more negatives than positives and blind to the upside, and have a skewed, imbalanced perspective, the more imbalanced it is, the more difficult it is to sleep. And so that's because it occupies space and time in your mind. There's an area of the brain that's subcortical called the amygdala. This amygdala, according to neuroscience, assigns valency, which is emotional charge, to events. It doesn't mean what it is true, because everybody's got a different view of it. Some person would look at it and they go, oh, that's fantastic. The other one would go, oh, that's terrible. But the amygdala assigns a valency to events, and when it does, it stores that in the hippocampus, which is nearby, that stores short-term into long-term memory. And the purpose of that is because if it's really positive, it's going to want to remember that because that's food. It represents prey. I got to get that again. If it's really painful, it means it's a predator. I want to avoid that. So it stores that in a brain, in their subconscious mind. And that literally regurgitates in the brain over and over again as noise. It's brain noise. Mm-hmm. And so anything that we don't have a balanced view of that's polarized into the dualistic view, we automatically have it run our minds and stored in the subconscious mind, and it keeps running our life. And anytime something reminds us of it, we'll seek or avoid it, and the external world runs our life. But if we bring them into balance, we run our life. And most people are victims of history and extrinsically run instead of a master of destiny and intrinsically called.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Because if we are in the amygdala and we are basically in the survival mode, we cannot run our life. We respond to stimulus from outside, and we cannot create a great destiny. I will come back to this as well.
Well, this amygdala is useful if a car is about to run you over or a tiger is about to eat you, and you're in really a survival need. It's useful. But in normal day-to-day activities, that's not the place to be spending your life. Let's put it that way, in the amygdala.
This is great. And if we can speak now about money, how is this being and living from amygdala and reacting to different things from outside, like pleasure and pain, how is this related to the level we can build wealth or being aligned and centered?
There's a very masterful gentleman on finance called Warren Buffett, and he says, until you can manage your emotions, don't expect to manage money. And there's a lot of truth in that. Most of the volatilities that go on in markets are because of people that have emotions. And what they do is when they get exuberantly irrational and they get really elated, they tend to buy overpriced stock, and then they end up losing their money when the market goes back to the mean. Or they're really down and really resentful and frightened. The fear makes them sell the stock when it's below. The two ways of losing money. So people that are more stable and steady and living more in their executive center, the cortical area, the medial prefrontal cortex area, they have more self-governance and more regulation, and they think longer term. And people that think longer term and are willing to, deal with the vicissitudes of the market and just keep long-term focus and keep buying stocks and buying quality assets of some form, they're the ones that end up accumulating wealth. Where the other ones are volatile and they're letting their emotions run them and they want to speculate and they have subjective bias and they misinterpret what's actually going on, and they're less likely to make money and keep money. So, yeah, immediate gratification costs economics, and long-term vision pays. And there's an old saying that there's timing of the market and time in the market. And the people that time of the market, they speculate, they gamble. And the people that time in the market, they're the ones that invest. So I would try to promote and tell people to think long-term and think of the mean in the oscillations of the market. That's to put a realistic expectation. Don't over-expect or under-expect. Set a realistic expectation. And then keep putting it in. You get wealthy. It's really not rocket science. It's really simple.
So now let's speak about values, which is one of the most important contributions. It made a huge difference in my life and also in the lives I took this message to. Because it's about you are allowing yourself to be yourself. So if we connect the money topic, which you were speaking earlier, with the values, how these are connected in order to build wealth.
Well, everybody has wealth. Wealth means wheel, comes from the word wheel, which means well-being, whole being. And everybody has wealth, but they may not have financial wealth. They have wealth in the sense of beautiful children. They have wealth in the sense of great friendships. They have wealth in the sense of spiritual awareness. They have wealth in the sense of their physical fitness. But that's genuine wealth. But financial wealth is a specialized aspect of wealth. And financial wealth, unless you have a very high value on serving people, making a contribution, meeting people's needs, so there's a source of income, valuing yourself enough to be able to say, I deserve to keep it, and then valuing the long-term investments instead of immediate gratifications, wealth is not likely to build. This is not, you have to allow it to work for you. So the hierarchy of one's values will dictate their financial destiny. If a person has a low value on wealth building, they're not likely to accumulate wealth. I've interviewed people. I've been studying values for 45 years, of the 51 years I've been teaching, and I've interviewed a lot of people and looked at their values and looked at wealthy people's values and poor people's values, and there's no question in my mind that the people that have a wealth, accumulate wealth, have a different set of values. They have a higher value on, serving, investing, and accumulating, where the other one has more of immediate gratification, consumables, and other things in their life. So I've met people that have even big businesses, and they grow big business and serve a lot of people, but they don't have a value on themselves or on wealth accumulation, and they just spend it all. And so they never have anything. So it's the deferred gratification that allows people to build wealth. And that only occurs if you have that high on your values. The hierarchy of your values dictates how you perceive, decide, and act. So your perceptions of the world, decisions, and the actions in the world are going to be based on what you value most. So I find that people that have financial independence, wealth building is in the top 4 values. And people that don't, it's in lower values. And that's been consistent. So if a person says, I want to be wealthy, but no matter what happens, I can't seem to get there, if we go and do their value determination, we're going to find it lower than the 4th value. And the individual that's already, it seems like no matter what they do, money comes to them and they keep it and they grow it. You're going to find that it's higher in their values because their decisions are going to be accordingly. The individual that has a higher value on wealth building will see opportunities, take advantage of opportunities, and apply things towards wealth building. I didn't have any wealth savvy, I guess, until I was 27. And a gentleman, a financial planner, walked into my office as a doc and asked if he could have a few minutes with me. And I said, okay. And he asked me, do you intend to become financially independent and wealthy? And my ego said, of course. He says, would you like to know if that's true? Ooh, like, yeah. He says, well, I have 9 questions I'm going to ask you, 10 questions I'm going to ask you. And if these answers, you have the answers to it, then I will believe you. And you're probably going to go into wealth building. If there's no answers there and you pause for those answers, I'm going to say, until you know those answers, it's not likely to occur. And I was like, okay, a little bit anxious. And he asked me, so what exactly is your total assets right now? Your current assets right now? And I go, I didn't know. What are your current liabilities? I had better idea of my liabilities, my debts, than I was on my assets. I even didn't know really what an asset was at the time, really. And he said, what's your current net worth? And I said, he said, well, that's your total assets minus your liabilities. That tells you your internal net worth. And I kind of estimated it the best I could. And they said, all right, what exactly is financial independence? How much money do you want to live on passively every year for you to be defining it as financial independence? Do you want $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year, $1 million a year, $10 million a year? What do you call financial independence? And I go, I never thought about it. And I came to the conclusion that I wanted at least a 6-digit figure, $100,000 at least. Now this is 1982, 82. So that was still some sort of substance at the time. And I was just out of school, and that seemed like a decent amount of income at that time. That would be worth around $600,000 a year now, but at that time. And so I wrote that down, and I told him that, and he said, okay, now what's the average interest rate you're going to earn on your investments? All your knowledge of investing, how much do you think you can earn every year? Passively. I had no idea. I said, 7-8%. And he goes, okay. I said, what's the inflation rate you're going to be facing? And I go, I have no idea. And he says, well, let's put down 3%. So I put 8% for investments and 3% for inflation. And he says, now how much money do you need, complete assets accumulated, earning that amount minus that inflation rate to give you the amount you say you want to live on every year? And I go, I have no idea. And he said, well, let's calculate it. And it turned out that I needed $2.1 million at that time. Today, if I had $2.1 million, I could live on $100,000 a year, earning 5% with investments minus inflation. So I wrote those down and I went, He said, so what's the question is, what's the shortfall between your current net worth to that total? Mm-hmm. And I was going, I need $2.1 million because it was really $2 million and I was $100,000 in debt. So I need $2,100,000. He said, so what's your strategy on getting that now? Because you need that by tomorrow. And I thought, I have no idea. So he really held me accountable and made me realize that I was living in sort of a fantasy and a delusion that I was somehow going to become wealthy somehow without any structure, without any strategies, without anything. And he really grounded me, and that was the day my financial life changed, because I realized that it wasn't just a fantasy. It had a real mathematical number, and I really needed to be accountable to make that happen. So I sat there, and he said, so what's your strategy? And I said, I have no idea. I started getting a headache. I started getting a knot in the stomach. I started thinking, I don't know. He said, if you didn't know where you were, your current total net worth, you don't know where you want to go, and you don't have a strategy getting there, how do you intend to make that happen? I said, it's not likely to happen. He says, exactly. So I came in here today to find out if you're really committed to doing it and see if I could help you. And he was really brilliant because it changed my life, and it also allowed him to be part of that process. So I sat down and I thought about it, and I literally had to go to the restroom, and I sat on the restroom, and I sat there going, with a headache, throbbing headache, going, because I couldn't think how I was going to do it. And I was thinking, I don't want to face the fantasy I had about being financially independent. I had a fantasy, and it felt good to look in the fantasy, but I didn't want to face the reality that it's not going to happen unless I do something. It's always going to be someday it's going to happen. And I really had a really, pounding headache. And then all of a sudden, I got this crazy idea. I said, right now I'm saving $200 a month. I need $2.something million. That'll never get me there. So I realized that I could increase that amount on a quarterly basis if I kept becoming more efficient and effective at work. And I thought, well, if I start small and I build up, the amount that I needed per month saved and per year saved in order to get that goal and invested, if I go below it, but I eventually go above it, I can get there. So I created a force accelerated savings and a force accelerated investment technique that came to me that day. And then I started applying it. And I made a commitment that I was going to increase the amount I was going to save and invest every quarter. And I did that for many, many decades. And slowly but surely, as I started to receive money and save more and put more away and invest more money started coming to me. And the more I managed it wisely, the more money came to me to manage. And then I eventually reached a point where I exceeded that goal, and it's many times exceeded that goal today.
I really appreciate that you shared this story, because from outside it looks like you've been always wealthy and you figured it out from the beginning. So I never imagined that you had a challenge like this and a defining moment for your life.
That was a very big turning point. I mean, I lived on the streets when I was a kid. I lived in under a park bench, and I lived in a tent when I was a teenager. So I didn't start out with a lot of money. I went back to school and I started my career, but I didn't know anything about money at the time. I lived in I was reading Charles Fillmore books, Prosperity, kind of a spiritual idea that it was going to be just prosperous and I was going to have an abundant life. Lived a bit in a delusion. And I'm not against the idea of a prosperous, abundant life. I believe that's doable, but there are some strategies that do increase the probability of that being achieved. And I think people deserve to, you might say, get a little jolt in their head to ground themselves to make sure that they do it. Some people know it because they had a value on wealth early. Mm-hmm. I don't think I had any value on wealth building until that day. I think I was just living in fantasy.
So this was a huge shift in your life, in your relationship with money. What would be, or what was the next big shift in your life? Because I heard of different amounts that you earn, and there are blockages or challenges, or there are some ceilings at some point. What was the second big shift you had in your relationship?
Well,
with
I
money?
started to save, and I increased my saving. I started out at 200, I went to 300, I went to 500, went to 750, I went to 1,000. When I hit 1,000, I ran a projection of where I would be if I was to keep saving $1,000 a month, because I felt I could do that. So I ran that, and I thought, oh, I'll be a millionaire in 34 years. And then I said, but I don't need to stop there at 1,000. So I decided at that moment that I was going to increase my savings investments by 10% every quarter. I just pulled that out because I felt like about every 90 days I developed a new habit, and that I could take a little bit of a comfort zone and push it a little bit. Mm-hmm. If I was saving 1,000, if I made it 1,100, I don't think it would be overwhelming to try that. And I figured I got nothing to lose. If I save the money, I always have the money to pay the bills, so I have nothing to lose. There's no risk in doing that. No risk in saving and investing. There's a risk in not doing it, but not in doing it. So I just made it 1,100. And then I ran another projection, and I was 31 years away from a millionaire. And then 3 months later, I made it 1,210. I put another 10% in. And I ran a number, and it was down to 28 and a half years. I was going to be a millionaire. And then I ran it again. I kept running projections. Every quarter, I kept increasing it. And I ran another projection. I'm now down to 25 and 21. And I kept doing that until I was 8 years away from the million. And then I was 2 years away from it. And all of a sudden, I reached my first million. And I thought, wow, this wasn't as difficult as I first imagined. And then I started attracting more business and more opportunities and more ways of generating income. Things started happening. And I just kept doing it. And that kept growing. I started saving. Every time I had a debt that was complete, I just put that into savings. I didn't raise my lifestyle excessively. I lived moderately. Most people, the second they get more money, they spend more. Every time I got more money, I just saved more. And I started letting it work for me. And when I say, I mean save and invest. I started buying stocks and buying real estate and things. And as I did that, I noticed that the quality of my clients went up, the associations, the opportunities, the income generating possibilities, they all started to go up. And so I just realized that this seems to work. So I started passing that on to other people and saying, this is what's working for me, try it out. And it worked for them too. Same thing started happening. So I realized that this is, if you don't put your money aside first and bring order to money, unexpected bills and entropy take it over. That's why the wealthy pay themselves first, not last. If you pay yourself first and invest, you attract more opportunities to make, because money goes in the economy to those who have the most order around it. And the people that pay themselves last and wait to see if there's extra, they always have unexpected bills that erode it, and they can't seem to get ahead. So I learned that was a major gift that moment.
This is amazing. Thank you for sharing. I wonder when along the way came your vision about how the vision connected, the vision related to your work and your legacy in this world, connected with money. When did it happen?
When did I have a desire to make a legacy?
Yes, and connected money with the vision you have and create a legacy.
Well,
because I guess it didn't happen at 27 when the gentleman came in.
No, I had a dream when I was 17 years old to travel the world, step foot in every country on the face of the earth, learn, because I had a learning problem, learn, read, write, communicate, speak. I wanted to be a teacher. And I knew that since 17. And I knew that I wanted to go to every country. I still haven't gotten to every country. I've been to 194 countries speaking, but I haven't got to every country yet.
And you've been to Romania as well.
And Romania, thanks to you all. And but I had the dream to do that, and so I didn't see it as a legacy. I saw it as a goal. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think that was meaningful to anybody else, just me. It was just something important to me. Mm-hmm. But then I realized that as I go along, I wanted to master all 7 areas of life. I wanted to create original ideas that serve people. I wanted to create a global business. I wanted to create financial independence. All those started to emerge. And then I realized that if I could exemplify that, because Einstein said that the greatest teacher is exemplification. So if I could exemplify that in each of those areas, I would be a greater teacher than if I just talked about it. So I figured I better be accountable to go and empower those areas as a teacher. So in the process of doing that, these things all kept unfolding. And I think when you're below average income and below average wealth, you think more socially. As you start to accumulate and get to be above average in finances, you start thinking more philanthropically and capitalistically. So,
philanthropically and capitalistically?
Well, but the people that have a bit of capitalism, what they do is they extract surplus labor value out of the employees and they get a profit. But in the gaining of the profit, they unconsciously took something from others that they produced, and then they end up having an accumulation of motives for them to give back. So eventually you can't take it with you in the afterlife, so you end up giving it back. And the people that don't, and they are struggling all the time, they have a tendency to unconsciously want the government to take care of them. So the people that have a low value of money end up being socialistic, and the people in the higher value of money that become capitalistic as a general principle. And the capitalists become the philanthropics, and the socialists become the welfare people. And these are two mechanisms, and there are unconscious sides trying to bring us back into the balance to make sure we have fair exchange.
Okay, sorry for interrupting, because you were saying about how your vision about your legacy and the money connected, and then I asked the question about philanthropic and capitalistic, so you clarified that. Please go on. How did you connect, and at what point you connected your vision about your legacy? And here I'm speaking about your philosophical, scientific work and money. How did and when they did connect? Because they are connected now.
Yeah, I don't know if they were... I think the connection really emerged gradually over time. They started becoming more integrated. I think because when I was raised, I was told, it's more blessed to give than to receive, and money is evil and all that other stuff. And I found that was not true. That was just a gimmick that the church was using in order to get the money. So I didn't find that to be true. I found that sustainable fair exchange was true. And I learned that in my 20s. Also about that time, when I started practicing, I started learning that if I try to give something for nothing, it backfires. If I try to get something for nothing, it backfires. If I'm narcissistic and I'm not meeting the customer's needs, they go somewhere else and I don't make money. And if I'm altruistically sacrificing for their needs, I don't keep money. So I had to find a balance between that, where I finally got sustainable fair exchange, where you give a service, you get a reward, and it's fair. And so I realized that is something that's to master, that's something to teach, and that's also something in relationship to humanity, that if you receive this from your life, you want to also give back to something in your life. So that's the philanthropic part that I think emerged. And also I realized that I was going to make more money and have more money than I was going to need. And I started thinking, well, so what am I going to do with that? How do I use that? And then I think, well, the benefit of that is that you can do something with people, because I can't say that when you give money to the taxation, that all the money that's being taxed is used in what I feel is the most wise manner. So this gives me an opportunity to use that money wisely, in what I think is wise at least. And in the process of doing it, I think education is wise. So my philanthropics is mainly about education and investing in people who contribute something that is solid, that's more in line with those universal laws that we talked about.
Thank you. If we go back now to universal laws, one of your greatest contribution is the law of synchronicity. Would you please define it, explain it in a few words, and why is this important?
Well, let's say that you are infatuated with somebody, and you're conscious of the upsides and unconscious of the downsides, and blinded a bit by your enamored infatuation. And then over a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, or longer, you gradually discover some of the downsides of the person you were infatuated with. And so it took a while for you to see both sides. The time it takes to see both sides is the arrow of time, which we call entropy. And we age because we had a delay before we saw the other side. If we were resentful, the same thing would occur, but in reverse. We're blind to the upside and we see the downside. And then over weeks or months, we find out and go, oh, thank you for that. I'm so glad that happened. I didn't see it then, but now I can say it really served me. So instead of having the wisdom of the ages with the aging process, and have time run our lives, which is aging, if we can see both sides simultaneously and see that there's a benefit and a drawback, and so ultimately it's balanced synchronously at the same time, we have the most profound wisdom, and we don't emotionally react. We don't have a fear of losing that which we infatuate with, or fear of gaining of that which we resent. We're present and they have the most resilient. because the inability to adapt to a changing environment is what's distress. And the reason why we have difficulty adapting is because we're fearing the loss of that which we seek and fearing the gain of that which we try to avoid. If we're not seeking and avoiding and we're just present, we don't have the aging process. We have more profound presence. We end up having more self-governance. Wilhelm Wundt, in 1895, the father of modern experimental psychology, said simultaneous contrast is where you have stability, and sequential contrast, adding time between the pair of opposites, you have instability. Now let's apply it to money. Let's say you go out and buy a credit card, get a credit card, and then you go to the store and you buy $5,000 worth of clothes. And then 30 days later you get a bill and you go, oh, and then you pay on top of that interest. And so the pain is separated from the pleasure. Mm-hmm. The pleasure is the shopping. The pain is now 30 days later. So anytime you separate pleasure from pain, you're going to your amygdala and you get the immediate gratification and then you get the consequence. But if you go and pay for cash and you pay right on the spot with cash, you're more likely to buy what's really priority instead of just impulse buy. So people with a credit card, which the banks used in order to get more income, they leveraged you. They take advantage of the amygdala. They make sure you go out and spend more than you can afford and then have to pay the debt. They make money off that. They also make the economy move. So the majority of people are basically separating the pleasures and pains, the positives and negatives in their life by their amygdala. And that's what ages them and stresses them and causes them to be in debt. The individuals that is actually fully aware of the real cost of that is going to prioritize and probably going to have an agenda and only buy what they really intend instead of impulse. The ones that are in pleasure and pain are going to buy by external sources and salespeople. The person that's clear knows what they're going to buy, goes and pays for it, and makes sure they have the capital, and usually saves money in advance and then buys it. And the way they manage money makes a difference. One gets wealthy, one doesn't.
So one way to apply the law of synchronicity would be to see both
the pain and pleasure, the infatuation, resentment, all pairs of opposites simultaneously. Simultaneously.
Okay. Would you share, please, that experiment with the water you shared in a course a few weeks ago?
This is the law of contrast.
Yes.
If I have a beaker of water and another beaker and another beaker, and this one's 40 degrees in Fahrenheit, which is, I don't know what it is in centigrade, maybe 4 degrees or something. And then this is 72 degrees, and this one's 140 degrees, so cool, cold, tepid, hot. If I put a thermometer in each one of those beakers, and I'll get an objective reading, 40, 72, 140. It will give me the facts, objective facts. That's what the temperature says.
Neutral.
Well, there's no,
objective. You're
not distorting it. There's the fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, if I go and put my hand in this, take the thermometer out, put my hand in there, I'll go, that feels about 40 degrees. Take my hand out, let it go back to room temperature, stick it in the water that's tepid, 72 degrees, go in there and go, yep, that feels around 72 degrees. Be accurate. Take it out, let it go back to neutral. Now I'll go over here and put it in a hot one, and now I'll go, ooh, that feels like about 140 degrees. So as long as I separate them by themselves, I can get a relatively objective reading of it. But if I put my hand into the cold and hold it in there, let my hand get cold, immediately take it out and put it into the normal one.
A whale?
Yeah, no. We're seeing an iceberg.
Oh, an iceberg. This is amazing.
Yeah. In case you didn't know, we're on a ship and we're on our way to Antarctica and there's iceberg floating by. But if you put your hand in that cold water, leave it there, and immediately put it into the tepid water, and then ask yourself, what's the temperature then? You will believe that it's 90 degrees because of the contrast. If you put it back to tepid, then go put it in hot water and leave it there, and then go to the tepid water, you'll think it's 50 degrees. So the second you compare the tepid water to those two, you'll distort your view. So too, if you meet somebody and you put them on a pedestal and you infatuate them, you'll minimize yourself in turn. Your perspective of yourself will actually be diminished. If you meet somebody you look down on and resent, you'll exaggerate yourself. So your perception of yourself gets distorted the second you exaggerate or minimize somebody else. You'll minimize and exaggerate you by the law of comparison, law of contrast. So that's why when we judge people, we are unable to actually know ourselves. We distort ourselves. So every time we judge and distort somebody else, we distort ourselves. So when we judge others, we end up judging ourselves. And whenever we love others and balance our perspective, we get to love ourselves. So that's the value of the law of contrast.
So
That's why the simultaneity of view allows you to feel loved.
thank you. Thank you. May I ask you, how did you manage when you had the first vision after working with Paul Bragg to maintain that vision? Because what happens a lot, and it happened to me as well, I have a clear vision about my path, and then sometimes it fades out somehow, and then I reconnect to it. So how did you manage when you were 17 to be so certain about your path and the image you had in your head about what you are meant to do, and hold it so vividly for so many years? How did you do that?
I'm stubborn. The night that I met Paul Bragg, he took us through a guided imagery meditation. And I really did have a profound view and vision that night. It was a real tearjerker epiphany. And I can't say that everybody gets it that way. Some people get it different ways, because I've certainly had people that didn't have this profound vision get clear and get focused. I just happened to that night access something that was deeply meaningful to me and was really valuable to me. And I think that some people go through life, they compare themselves to others, minimize themselves, exaggerate others, inject the values of others in their life, cloud the clarity of what their real calling is, and keep going around the edges of it and never really narrow down what that is that they are inspired by. And they don't give themselves permission to follow it, because they're trying to fit in and be pleasing people that they admire. And I think in my case that somehow I just nailed it that night. And I realized that that's what I wanted to do. I had a void when I was a child of speaking and reading and that kind of thing, writing. So it became perfect for me. And I've helped thousands of people find what that is. And some it's not quite as easy because they're so used to being comparing themselves to other people. I always tell people, if you compare yourself to other people and put them on pedestals of pits, you'll put yourself on pits and pedestals, and you'll be wobbling around all your life. But if you actually compare your daily actions to what your hierarchy of values is, and the highest value, you have the highest probability of building momentum, incremental momentum towards the goal you want. So that's why I put the value determination process on the website for free, because I think that that's probably one of the greatest starting points for anybody if they want to master their life, is get clear about what's really, truly, intrinsically meaningful to them and important to them.
And I think this is why you will also do the letter after the breakthrough experience, after going through the process, the letter you write to yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
Because if you don't decide how you want your life, somebody else does. And nobody gets up in the morning. If you can tell me anybody that gets up in the morning and dedicates their life to your fulfillment, I'd be great. I haven't found them. Nobody's got a genie. It's a kind of a fantasy to think that somebody's going to get up and dedicate their life to your fulfillment. So I realized that if you take everybody else's expectations that are projected onto you and try to please all those people, you'll scatter yourself with chronic fatigue syndrome. But if you actually find out what's really meaningful to you and give yourself permission to prioritize your life and say thank you but no thank you, there's an art of saying thank you but no thank you to other people, and get onto it. And then find a way of doing something that really is meaningful to you in a way that serves people. Because then they encourage you and help you get what you want. And so if you help other people get what they want, you get what you want. That's a very simple principle, but sometimes we don't pay too much attention to it.
You mentioned earlier about the hidden order. What does it mean to you? And if you can connect this idea of hidden order in a person and in what happens around them and the whole universe, that would be so amazing.
Well, order and disorder is a term in a field of physics called thermodynamics. And I started studying that when I was 18. And I remember coming across Ludwig Boltzmann, and he was the one, in Clausius, another one, and Einstein also. Einstein did a little thing on Brownian movement where he took some ditch water and he put it on a little slide, and things were moving around inside, a bubble slide. And things were moving around, and he was looking, and he was just looking at the random movements of debris sitting in water. And he filtered it out, and as he got down where there's only one particle in there that was visible, he could find and see the physics of why it was moving. When he added the second particle, it became more complex, twice as complex. But he could figure it out. When he put the third particle in there and filtered out, just allowed 3 particles in there, it was now 6 times more complex because of the interactions. When he put the fourth particle in, it was 24 times more complex. And the complexity was growing geometrically by what they call factorials. So as he had the fifth particle, is now 125 times more complex, and it got too complex for him. His mind couldn't wrap around how things were making it happen. So I thought, it doesn't mean that there's not an order in things. It's just so complex that our computations are keeping us from seeing the pattern. And so Stephen Wolfram, who's a mathematician today, said that it's the computational boundary of the human awareness, or the algorithms that we use in computers or in our awareness, that are keeping us from seeing the order that's actually going on in our daily life. And so we label things disorder, and we tend to think that things are going from order to disorder by the law of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. And Boltzmann said he didn't know for sure if that law was true. It's a probabilistic system, and it's not necessarily the way life is. It's the way life is through our perceptions and our aware of computations. So I've never been satisfied with entropy. Entropy, according to Claude Shannon, was the tendency to go to disorder, and disorder meant missing information. In information theory, it says missing information. So I believe that that's like the unconscious. It's missing information. You're blind to the downside when you're infatuated. So if you can see the upside and the downside simultaneously, you see the hidden order in what was happening. So as I started to work with that in developing my methodology, I had people that were having traumas or ecstasies, infatuations, resentments, or whatever, and I asked them where was the other side and balanced it out, and they got tears of gratitude. They saw, now I understand why this is happening. They see the hidden order. And the same thing in traumas. Where's the upsides? Now they see the hidden order, why this is happening. And trying to help people see the hidden order in their apparent chaos is very rewarding, because then the world on the outside had nothing to do with what's going on. It's all about what they had perceived, and they have command over their perception, and they can ask new questions to become conscious of what was unconscious and see the hidden order. And helping people do that is one of the most profound things I've seen as a contribution to people's lives.
How does this connect one's life with their mission? Seeing the hidden order, being able to see the hidden order.
Well, the confirmation of being congruent with your mission is a tear of gratitude, which is exactly what occurs when you see the hidden order. So the moment you have a perfect balanced mind and you see both sides simultaneously, there's a synchronicity in the brain. See, when you're infatuated with somebody, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is more rest and digest, and activates more delta waves in the brain, which is 3 cycles per second. When somebody's challenging you and you're resenting somebody, you activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is daytime, which is about 13 cycles per second, beta waves. When you put those in perfect balance, you get alpha theta waves, around 8 cycles per second. When you get 8 cycles per second, get exactly in the center, you're not infatuated with somebody, minimizing yourself. You're not resenting somebody, exaggerating yourself. You're being yourself and seeing the hidden order in what's happening. You're getting simultaneous, and you get a confirmation in the brain of a gamma synchronicity in the frontal cortex and frontal cortex. And you get this tear of gratitude, and you see the order, and you go, it's a eureka moment. And I believe that the brain is doing what it can to confirm every moment of authenticity. When we're not judging, we're just loving. And I think that that's a very profound state. And so I developed my method, to maximize that experience for people, particularly in a certain phase of it called 6 and 13, column 6 and 13, to help them see the synchronicity and the balance of those. And the moment they do, they have confirmation, and there's a certainty inside them. They know they're being authentic, and they're loving, and they're grateful. And to me, gratitude and love of the heart, certainty and presence and inspiration and enthusiasm, this is the core of the things that I'm trying to help people master in their life.
Great, thank you. Can we tackle some practical issues in relationship to addictions? How would you define them? When do they happen? And what would be the first step to transform them? Because this is a frequent issue and with high charges usually.
Well, I'm not a big favorable guy on the 12-step program. I've not found that to be the most efficient way of doing it. But people have done that. because it comes from an idea that you're disempowered, some supernatural power is supposed to take care of it. It's kind of a dissociated state. What I do is when I take somebody who's addicted to something, that could be sugar, it could be chocolate, it could be cigarettes, it could be alcohol, it could be sex, it could be some form of drug, whatever it may be, maybe whatever somebody else labels working, I mean, it could be anything. And I ask them, so what are the benefits you're getting out of doing what you're doing? Because many people say, well, I've got this alcohol thing and I got to get rid of it, it's killing me. I go, yeah, I know, but nobody will ever do anything unless they get more advantage and disadvantage out of doing it, consciously or unconsciously.
Say that again, please.
No one will continue to do something unless they get more advantage and disadvantage, consciously or unconsciously. Consciously, they're saying, I got to stop. This is killing me. I got to do. I need help. But unconsciously, they're saying, I'm still getting more advantage and disadvantage. And they don't know what their unconscious is doing it. So my job is to bring the unconscious up by asking questions and make them aware of what they are actually doing. So I ask people when they're, like I had this lady that came to me at a reality TV show I was filming in the Universal Studios in LA. And this big lady came in and she brought in 2 big boxes of food and she said, I brought everybody food in case you get hungry, and then went on to eat it all. She ate more food in that day than I would eat in a week. And she said, oh, you got to help me, Dr. Demartini. No matter what I do, I can't seem to lose weight. It's just killing me. Look at me. You need to. And I said, stop. I said, what's the benefit out of you eating and keeping weight on? Well, there is no benefit. That's why I'm trying to get help. I said, stop. Your life is demonstrating you're doing it. So somehow there must be more advantage and disadvantage in your brain. So what's the benefit you're getting out of doing it? And she hemmed and hawed and dodged and didn't want to answer that. And she wanted to run her story. I said, hold yourself accountable. What's the benefit you're getting out of this? And finally she stopped and she said, everybody in my family is large. If I'm not large, I don't feel like I'm fit part of my family. I feel, disconnected from my family. Okay, good. What's another benefit? My sister, when I was young, used to push me around, and she's always been bigger. And I didn't like being pushed around, so I made myself bigger than her so she could push me around. And she got teary-eyed. And she realized that was sitting in there. So even though she was saying, I got to stop this, deep inside in her unconscious, I don't want to be pushed around by anybody. So I'm going to be big. As long as I'm big, they can't push me around. And I don't want to be separate from my family because I don't want to be left out of the family. I said, what's another benefit? Then she started really getting tears and she goes, whoa. I said, what is it? She goes, I went on a crash diet a number of years back and I lost 45 pounds. I literally fasted myself. And I started to have a bit of a figure, first time in my life. And then I met this guy and he hit on me. He kind of came on to me. And I didn't know, I'd never been with a guy before. And I thought I thought I was in love. I was infatuated with him and I was thinking somebody wanted me. And we literally, the very first day we got together, we had sex and I made love with him. And the next day he was gone. I never saw him again. Wow. And 7 weeks later I found out I had a baby coming. And I was a Catholic background and I go, if I have an abortion, I'm going to hell. If I have this baby, I'm having a baby with somebody I don't want to even think about it again. I despise. And I'm not going to want this baby. So she said it was the most terrifying, most aggravating thing in her life. And she associated losing weight with the most painful thing she's ever had in her life. So she ended up having an abortion. And she's been feeling guilty about that. So every time she thought she's thin, that's what happened. So she wasn't going to get thin again because she didn't want a guy hitting on her. So she kept the weight on to protect herself from that type of experience.
As a strategy. As
a strategy, unconscious strategy. So she had a subdiction from those events. A subdiction, which is opposite to an addiction, of not fitting into the family, right? Not being pushed around. All those are pains that she's wanting to avoid unconsciously. And these are her strategies on how to keep herself from having those pains. So these pleasures are compensations for those pains. So I went through there and I asked her, and I kept asking more benefits and benefits. We got 75 benefits. And finally she turns to me and she said, I really don't have an intention of losing weight. I said, no, you don't. Not at least at this point. She goes, this makes sense because even if I try to go without food, my metabolism seems to drop and I keep the weight on to protect myself. I said, that's it. And she said, nobody's ever confronted me. They just tried all these different things and none of them have ever worked. I said, well, you didn't get to the real root of this, which is your own mind, your own strategy, because everything's strategic. But people don't ask the right questions to see that. And there's a hidden order why they're doing it. So I said, unless you have a viable alternative way of getting those same benefits, being part of the family, making sure you're not pushed around, making sure you don't have an anxiety about getting pregnant, as long as you have an alternative strategy, you don't have to eat to do it. So let's look for viable alternatives. So I helped her find viable alternatives. I linked that to her highest value, so she would have a higher probability of doing those things instead of the eating. I then started delinking and finding the drawbacks of now eating, because if you tell people the drawbacks of doing something they're addicted to without an alternative, they're going to have more anxiety. They're going to do it again.
And shame and guilt.
And shame and guilt. So once we found a viable alternative, that took the pressure off. She saw an alternative way of doing it, and then she was to see the downsides. Once the downsides of the old strategy is greater than the downsides of the new strategy, there's more advantages. Her physiology and actions go in that new direction, and they change her behavior without labeling them, without shaming them, without saying they're disempowered, without saying some supernatural power's got to take over. They have the power to do this inside themselves.
So if we connect things you said earlier, actually in the first step, when you asked for the benefits, you applied the law of duality, finding out the hidden order. Why she's doing the strategy she's doing.
Yeah, because when she discovers that, she realizes this is all in her power.
Yes.
She's repowered because she realized, I made that decision, but I didn't want to admit that decision because it's not socially acceptable. A lot of people compare themselves to people, and they're worried about rejection of other people, and they suppress or repress. Repression is usually an unconscious strategy, and suppression is a conscious strategy to avoid people's rejection because you don't want to lose pride. You hold on to pride. So this is a way of maintaining pride, but also saying I've got a problem, and then they want to dissociate and blame something out there that's doing it. My metabolism, my thyroid, my family, or what they want to blame instead of actually look inside on what they're doing and actually be grateful for their strategy. Because when you think about it, she got 75 benefits out of one act, eating. That's pretty ingenious when you think about it. But the question is, can we come up with an alternative that'll get the same thing done without having to do the eating? That's all.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. Another question is related to situations that happen in family when, for instance, a girl is born, but the parents or the father or the mother expected a boy. So she's born in a context where she kind of was supposed to be someone else than she is. How would you approach this subject? How would you work with such a...
Very simple. You never get challenged without support. You don't ever get one-sided things. So if one of the parents didn't want you, there's some aunt or uncle or next door neighbor or somebody that did want you. All you have to do is find out who is it that wanted you, and you'll find out that you were already interacting with them. You won't get rejection without acceptance. You won't get put down without build-up. Nature always has a pair of opposites. So I just make her aware of where the other side was at the same time that was going on. And by the way, every parent has times when they want and don't want their children.
Definitely.
I mean, when you ask a mother when she's had a baby, socially, she's going to say, oh, my lovely baby. But inside, she's going to have two sides. When the baby's supporting her values, she's going to thank God I got my baby. When the baby's driving her crazy and making her where she's got not sleep or anything else, she's going, what did I get myself into? She's got both sides. So there's times when she wants the baby and other times go play in the traffic. And the same thing with the husband. That just like in a marriage, I mean, sometimes you want to be with each other, sometimes you don't want to talk to each other. It's normal to have things of like and dislike along the similarities and differences. And so it's unrealistic to expect the fantasy that you're supposed to always be wanted and liked all the time, because it's not true. But when I actually take that person who said my mother didn't want me, I go, well, yeah, did she breastfeed you? Oh, yeah, for 2 years. Did she feed you? Yep. Did she take you places? Yep. Did she get clothes on your back? Yep. Did she make sure that you were getting your homework done? Yep. So what's the evidence that she didn't want you? So there's parts that did and didn't, and it vacillated. But some people have a fantasy that people are supposed to be one-sided, and they can't be. And that's their fantasy that they have to break to grow up. Because every human being's got both sides. I'm sure there's times when some people you meet, and you like them, and other times you don't like their behaviors. You like some and don't like others. That's part of normal behavior.
Yeah, and that happens also with myself. So sometimes I like
Same as
myself.
yourself. No, if anybody can say I like myself 100%, 24 hours a day, all day, every day, that's a delusion. You're going to like and dislike. You have a licensing effect inside you that the second you're proud of yourself, you automatically make your mind think of the things you're ashamed of to make sure you balance it, to get back into authenticity. So I crack the fantasy that, because people say, well, I was an unwanted child. Okay, at times, but you're there. And, oh, well, my parents gave me up for adoption. Well, great. Then who wanted you? Well, the people that took me over. The foster care, the this. So you didn't miss somebody wanting you. You're just concentrating on that instead of looking for both sides. If you look at both sides, you realize that you're just a human being, and that's your journey. Sir Isaac Newton, I had a boy that was complaining that he was abandoned by his family, put in an orphanage, and then foster family, and then a foster family rejected him and stuck him back in the orphanage, and then another foster. So he says, I'm an unwanted child. That's the label he gave himself. And he says, well, that's the reason I'm having all these problems and why I'm turning out the way I am. And the psychologist was feeding that. Well, you had this and this, and most people statistically have this and that. It was just ridiculous what they were feeding this kid. So somebody got him to chat with me, and I said, you know how to use the internet? And he goes, yeah. He says, let's get on the phone and let's look something up. Let's look up famous people, famous celebrities that came from an abandoned family and an orphanage. He goes, okay, we typed it in there, and up come these names. Sir Isaac Newton, Bill Clinton, Wayne Dyer, Tycho Brahe. I mean, the names of famous people. There were 700 names we found. Wow. And I said, do you know this person? He goes, no, let's look him up. And he accomplished this. So he came from the same place you did, and he accomplished one of the greatest accomplishments. He became one of the greatest scientists. He became one of the greatest influencers. And we started to list all these people. And I said, you are in that category. You were gifted with this experience to be in that category of people on this planet. You're special, don't you get it? Instead of sitting playing victim of history, why don't you become master of destiny and take the same experience, put it into that, and go and do what they've done with their lives. That's all it took. He saw a new possibility. He said, I'm special. He started applying himself, changed his whole thing. The story changed. Because he'd been running a story of victim.
This is amazing. If we go back to universal laws, would you please elaborate a bit on the law of heuristic escalation? And then I have a question on it.
Well, the law of heuristic escalation is a sub-law of chaos theory. And in this law, it states that if any ideologue promotes an ideal, let's say that a pro-abortion group, and there's an ideologue who's a real fanatical, radical person that says, abortions are evil, and that you're killing kids and there's evil and everything else. As you do that, you don't see the upside of the abortion. You see all downside. And so anytime you see one side and you don't see the upside to that, and you promote that, an equal and opposite force, another ideologue will stand up who's also radical on the other side and be pro-abortion.
So we have balance.
So what will happen is, and this is sort of like the dialectic that Zeno described, that anytime somebody proposes a proposition that says this is good, somebody will come in there and point out the downsides to it. Plato used this in his dialogues to try to wake people up. And so he would point out the downsides to it. And the purpose of the downside is to make this person see both sides, and the purpose of this guy is to make that person see both sides. So if they're intelligent, they'll use the oppositions to integrate and both learn from each other. That's the dialectic. If they don't, they'll use persuasion and argument and defense to stand up against each other, and neither one will grow. They'll just be right. And they'll stay proud, and they'll live in their fantasy that life is one-sided. So they fight. And that's what you see. And when that occurs, the law of heuristic escalation occurs. As the number of people support this group, the number of people support this group, and they both grow until there's a massive argument, and the Supreme Court takes over now on how to deal with that refutations, right? And we see this right now in Palestine and Israel. Last month was a classical law of heuristic escalation. Millions of people across the world started escalating right and wrong about one side or the other. The truth is, always a balance between the two. But that's the dialectic. Intelligent people use the dialectic and go towards the synthesis. Unintelligent people stand their ground and become right, and then erode it and then give all their money over to lawyers and courts and and kill themselves with health issues and Lord knows what, because they're just rigid and they don't want to see both sides of life.
When people hear about the law of heuristic escalation, they say sometimes that they are scared to, really wanting something because the other part kicks in.
Well, they're under the assumption that the other part's not already there. It's already there. They're blind to it. And so the more they infatuate with it, the more they fear its laws, and the more if they assume that, well, if I have that, I'm going to have the opposite. The other half is already there. They're just blind. If they go and ask, what's the pleasure of this? Where's the pain that comes with it? And balance it. They can have it without the fantasy. And that's the difference. So many people go, well, I don't want to go and become successful because I'm just going to attract a tragedy. Well, I'm not interested in being successful. I'm interested in being a man on a mission. The second you think you're successful, you have a little bit of a fantasy that you're proud and you're thinking you're doing more positives than negatives. I found that that's unproductive. CEO of Coca-Cola Company, who used to be on Berkshire Hathaway board, when they asked him about an interview about how do you hire people and everything else, he said, I don't want people that think they're successful, they're on their way down. People that think they're successful and proud are on their way down. Hubris. Mm-hmm. People that are on a mission and see both sides and keep themselves stable and centered, they're the people that are most productive. So I'm a man on a mission. I don't call myself successful. I get interviewed by people and say, well, how did you become successful? I don't label myself successful. Because I think the definition of this, when you think you're successful, it means you have a small vision, you've already achieved it, you're proud of what you achieved, you assume with a false attribution bias that you've done something good without bad, you're blind to your downsides of what you've done, and you will eventually attract critics and challengers to humble you to get you back in the balance. And then you'll think, well, you're angry at them for criticizing you, but the critics are actually trying to get you back into authenticity and off your pride. So I'm not interested in trying to be successful or trying to be one-sided or look for one side. I find it unproductive, distracting.
Thank you. What was your most difficult moment to balance and using the universal laws to balance your perceptions?
The most difficult moment to balance. There was a couple moments in my career where I had a challenge. I had somebody who had done a company, Goodway production company it was called, that I went and did I guess you could call it an educational commercial. And right in the middle of the commercial, I was doing it on the Breakthrough Experience, my signature program, when I first started it. They said, well, we would like to do a commercial on that and advertise that and put it out there. Fantastic. Well, then I found out that I was naive and I was disempowered and I didn't have a lot of legal knowledge at the time. I was in probably 30-something years old, just young 30s. And the company took that brand, the Breakthrough Experience, and launched it and left me behind.
Wow.
And so my work all of a sudden got launched. I was going, whoa, wait a minute now. I didn't see that coming. Mm. And then they wanted to do it, and they didn't want to do it with integrity. They didn't want to do it with the same message I was trying to bring. And I felt really hurt by it. And I remember I was really angry and bitter. I was seeing the negatives, not the positives, and was really revengeful. How can they do this to me? And, I was really the victim at that moment. And at that moment, a patient came in my office, and then felt that I didn't do something and was now angry at me. The day I was angry, I got a client that came in that was angry at me to help me reflect and see that. And I had an intuition that that's what was happening, but I was so angry I didn't want to listen to my own intuition. So I had a rough time. It took me weeks to get that really balanced because I felt like I'd spent all this money, and all of a sudden these people just walked away with it. And I felt that was a robbery of me. And at the time, it seemed like a lot of money. It was going against what I was trying to do because I was trying to do this advertising. And I learned a lesson on that because I was basically trying to build a brand around me instead of around the cause. And it was the perfect thing to humble me. And I could see it. It took me weeks to see that. And everything was happening. And the second I saw it, the whole thing dissolved. Just poofed.
How do you explain that? Because that happens with every client I work with.
Well, I was no longer angry. When they went out with it, it didn't work. And they stopped. And then the guy with the lawsuit, that ended up not going anywhere. It just calm, because I changed my perspective. I came off my pride and my arrogance and my defense, and I just got back and I saw the order of it, and I saw what it was trying to do. But boy, for those weeks, I was like, I wanted to punch people. And it was my lesson of the addiction to pride and fame and fortune and all these other things that I was thinking was going to happen and everything else. I created a fantasy that I needed popping.
I really appreciate that you shared this experience with us. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have one more question about your routines, and then one more question a bit more spiritual. And then if you're open, I have some more questions from clients online. Is it okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Dr. John Demartini, you are 69, and I think I know you for 10 years now, and you don't seem to be aging. What's your secret? What do you do?
Thank you, by the way. I don't know if I could say the same thing. I can see things that are changing, but I don't live to eat. I eat to live. I feed my body, more priority food, real food, most consistently. And so you saw what I ate this morning. I have yogurt and fresh fruit and grains of some form. And then I have usually soup or salad or sandwich or fish. And I eat simple. I don't overeat. I don't undereat. I have what they call moderation, rhythm, and consistency. And so from a dietary perspective, I try to maximize. I do take a supplement. I drink a lot of water. I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink stimulants. I don't do drugs. I haven't taken drugs. So I think all those are important. I do moderate exercise. I can't say I do lots of exercise, but I do at least once a week. I do a good workout. And I'm doing what I love every day. I've delegated pretty well most everything off my plate. And I teach, research, write, and travel. I full-time travel. I teach every day. I write every day. I'm learning and researching every day. And those are the things that I love most. So I fill my day with the things that I love to do. I delegate everything else to specialists. So I have people doing everything. I haven't driven a car in 32 years. I haven't, cooked really since I was 24. Everything else I delegate. I even have a clock changer. It changes the clocks as I'm sailing around the world because we're changing time zones. So anything that distracts me that I would need external motivation to get me to do, anything that I procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate, I just hire somebody to do it, take care of it. And then I concentrate on what I love doing, so I'm not as distressed. I'm more objective. I'm in my highest priorities. I'm more resilient, adaptable, and I don't have as much distress. And so I think that has a factor. Plus the Demartini method that I have is useful in clearing out the entropy, clearing out the distractions and the disorder and the perceptions. And I really believe that method has assisted me in maintaining a stability and less aging. Because I've seen the people that have been applying it, you can start to see it in a decade, you start to see the impact. So all those are part of it. I think I'm inspired by what I do. I think when you're inspired and you're grateful for what you get to do, I think that helps. And so I think that's probably what does it. And also, if I see a wrinkle, I get a washcloth and I scrape it off.
How many hours per night you sleep now?
Today, I would say it could be from 5.5 to 6.5. It varies.
And for the past years?
Gradually, I slept for 4 hours a day from 18 to about 60. And then for about 60, my prostate started to get a little bit enlarged and it's waking me up in the middle of the night. So I would wake up and I'd lose some sleep. So I've had to extend the sleep some. And so I would say that's today. But for many years, I just did 4 hours. I did a lot of meditation and I prefer meditating than sleeping. So I would just sit and meditate and lean my head over to the side, and that was my sleep for many years. I try to schedule 6.5 to make sure I get at least 6 good hours now.
Thank you. And one last question, which is more related to spiritual area. What do you think is the purpose of life?
Well, each individual has a set of priorities and set of values derived from the voids of the judgments that they've held in their life. that are making the trajectory of what they feel is most purposeful in their life unique to them. So I don't think there's any purpose that's a collective purpose other than to fulfill what's most meaningful in your life. So each as individuals. So you may be a mother dedicated to raising children and you feel that that's your purpose in life, to be a magnificent mother. You may be a business person. You may be a social, political individual. You may be some metaphysical, spiritual focus or fitness or wealth building or business savvy, or combinations of any of those. It's completely unique to that individual, and helping people find out what their values are and help them focus on that gives them more vitality and meaning in their lives. So the purpose of life is to fulfill whatever's most missing in your life. I found out what the voids were that drove those values, because as Aristotle said, it's the emptiness that wants fulfillment. And the emptiness is the result of comparing yourself to other people and being too proud or too humble to admit what you see in others inside you. That creates the emptiness from judgment, and that emptiness wants fulfillment. So ultimately the purpose of all of us is to maximize the efficiency of learning how to love and appreciate our lives. And if we don't pursue that and we keep banging our head against the wall and keep judging people, we have an unfulfilled life and a meaningless life, it seems. But ultimately, there's no universal meaning and purpose that I see other than the pursuit of the synthesis and synchronicity of opposites, which I've defined as love. So everybody's pursuing unconsciously or consciously this thing that they feel is most meaningful and loving for them.
Thank you very much. What are the main causes of the panic attacks?
A panic attack is a secondary impact from some primary event that occurred. You had some event that you perceived more drawbacks and benefits, more pains and pleasures, more losses and gains, more disadvantage and advantage, probably very extreme polarity. And then as you're going through life, other things that remind you of that original event is now triggering an anxious feeling that's not as extreme as the original one, but it's reminding you of that. And then you're going on further and compounding that with new associations that remind you of each of those. And it accumulates where a whole bunch of stimuli can eventually create an anxiousness. So the anxiety is a secondary, tertiary, and quaternary compounded original event that you were frightened of and labeled terrible. And if you go in there and rebalance the original event with the Demartini method and balance it, sometimes that whole cascade disappears, the panic's gone. Sometimes you have to peel the onion step by step back. Sometimes you go back to the original event, clear the event, the whole thing disappears. I've had many of those cases that can be solved. I do what I call 6 and 13 in my Demartini method on that and show them how at the moment they had an event, where was the other side? Because then if they see it as a terrible event, they didn't see the terrific part. So if I go and show them the terrific part that occurred simultaneously that they overlooked and they were unconscious of, and bring them to balance at that moment, and do that for each of the moments that they thought they had a tragic event, the whole thing disappears. The post-traumatic thing is gone and the anxiety is gone.
So you go frame by frame, applying the law of synchronicity.
Yeah, I use the law of synchronicity frame by frame through the thing that they originally had. Because if you start, well, when did it begin? If they say, well, I don't know. No. When did it begin? They go, well, okay, 2 years ago. What happened? This. Okay, so that is still associated in their brain with drawbacks without benefits. It's a pain there. So I got to go in there and neutralize that event. And then maybe some secondary ones I may have to neutralize. They've compounded it. But I call those compounding. You get an initiator, a promoter, and a compounder over time. And your anxieties become more diverse. More and more things can trigger it because it's been new associations with it. Mm-hmm. If somebody sees a mother and father fighting, and the father was wearing blue jeans and had a white shirt on, and the mother's wearing a white dress, the next day, if a child watched that and it was frightened by it, the next day if they see a guy with blue jeans and a white shirt or a woman with a white dress, they might have an affection or a resistance. And they won't know why. But it's there, other than consciously stimulating them through their senses, triggering them this angst that they got from the fighting of the parents. So that's a secondary compounding of an event. And those things can keep diversifying. You get blue jeans and a yellow shirt, blue jeans and a red shirt. As long as one of the things is associated with the original event, it can trigger an anxiety response.
What are the strategies you recommend for overcoming obstacles in the pursuit of alignment?
Alignment, I'm assuming, is them living congruently with what they value most and doing what they feel is their real mission in life. I'm assuming that, so I'm going to respond accordingly. If you do the value determination process that's on my website and identify what's really, truly most meaningful, important, and priority to you, and then ask yourself the question, what are the highest priority actions I can do to help fulfill that? So you have a strategy to fulfill that. And you stick to the highest priorities in doing that and learn how to gradually delegate all things that distract you that are lower priority off. You gradually move in your direction of incrementally momentum building achievements towards what it is that you're more fulfilled in. And that's an alignment. So it's dedicating to what is high priority and delegating what is low priority will move you in the direction of this achievement or this path of fulfillment.
How can we bring money to our highest values?
The question is, how do you bring wealth building higher on your values?
I guess so.
Yeah, I think so. Because your hierarchy of values dictates how you perceive, decide, and act, and therefore your behavior and your actions and your destiny. If you don't have a value on money, then what you want to do is, if you want to grow wealth, if that's the objective, you want to write down what are the action steps that have proven through time on numerous people to build wealth. What's the achievement leaves clues behind. It leaves evidence of what people have done to achieve things. What are the highest priority actions that have proven to help people build wealth? Taking a portion of whatever you earn, setting it aside, selecting wise, highly governed, managed investments that are true and not fantasies, not speculations, and being patient. These action steps, if you make a list of the action steps that are highest in priority that increase the probability of building wealth, and then asking how is doing that action step help you fulfill what you value most, and make a link in the brain between those actions, you increase the probability of you now doing those actions to fulfill what's meaningful to you. Anytime you want to increase the probability of doing something, link it to your highest value and it spontaneously becomes a habit. So that would be the thing I would do, is to make a list of all the highest priority actions that have been proven to help build wealth and link how specifically doing those actions will help you fulfill what your life demonstrates currently is really most important to you. And if you do that, wealth building will go up on your value list and you'll now increase the probability of doing the actions that lead you to having some money at the end of your life instead of life at the end of your money.
Thank you. Why is it that people get to the point when they feel a decision fatigue?
Well, a decision is to bring death to an option. You know, homicide, suicide, genocide, insecticide, infanticide, patricide, matricide, any side that ends in a word means death to, bring death to. Decide means bring death to an option. So if you have a choice between this and this, one of them's going to come alive, one's going to end up dying. So decision is basically taking what your perception is that has more advantage over disadvantage and going in the direction of advantage. Now, in order to do that, you have to have some sort of subjective biased interpretation of reality, because every event has two sides. If you do this, there'll be advantages and disadvantages. If you do this, there'll be advantages and disadvantages. So you're making an assessment based on your experience, your own subjective biases, your own blind spots, and you're making a decision accordingly. Now, your intuition, if you start to think there's going to be more benefits and drawbacks, your intuition is going to whisper to you, nope, here's the downsides. If you don't listen to the intuition, you just quickly make a decision, then you find out by blind sight, you find out later what the downsides are. Almost everybody that set a goal and made a decision to do something, they found it was a lot more difficulty than they thought, more challenges than they anticipated. So there were both sides there, but you assumed there was more advantage, you were blinded by it, and your intuition is whispering. The more polarized that decision, the easier it is to make the decision, but the more blinded you were and the more you get hit by a broadside. And so the anxiety of making a decision when something is not clearly black and white in their mind uses up energy, because you're having to calculate the benefits and drawbacks and probabilities and stuff, and that uses a lot of energy in the brain. So people don't want to do that, particularly if they're having to make a decision that's not perceived as helping them get what they really want. When they do, they've got an internal conflict between what they really want, what they think they should be doing. So the second you look up to somebody, admire them, inject their values in your life, make decisions, you're now making decisions based on injected values instead of your own. Now, when you make a decision based on that, you do what you think is right, but you're now going against what's true to you, and now you have an internal conflict, and that fatigues people. And it's designed to fatigue people because they're not being authentic. They're trying to live in other people's values. And anytime you try to live in other people's values, you're going to get chronic fatigue syndrome and fatigue from decision making.
I heard you speaking about spontaneous action. What's the relationship between taking spontaneous actions and thinking, analyzing things?
When we perceive something that we think has more advantage and disadvantage, we have an impulse in our amygdala that's assigned to our hippocampus that that's good, that's positive. Quickly go and grab it. It's prey. And so you make a quick decision, you go after it, and you act, and you've judged that to have more benefits and drawbacks. And the same thing in reverse. If you see something that you think's got more drawbacks and benefits, you get an instinct to avoid it, and you avoid it. And so your amygdala assigns a negative association with it and valence, and all of a sudden you avoid it. And so you're now making assessment with subjective biases. And subjective biases is designed for survival to accelerate adrenaline to make sure you run fast enough to catch the prey and run fast enough to avoid the predator. But if you start to balance out your perception, and it's neither predator or prey, neither something you seek or avoid, and it comes to the center, you don't have evoked potentials from stimuli externally. You have spontaneous potentials from the brain. Potentials are another way of saying action potentials inside the brain, which is the way neurons fire and communicate. So the second you have a spontaneous potential that's not evoked, you have an intrinsic action that's spontaneous from within instead of evoked from without. And people that have spontaneous action are not run for the external world, they're run from inside. I call it the calling inside. And when somebody has a state of grace and love and they're in perfect equilibrium, spontaneous potentials come in the brain and synchronicities in the brain shoot off, and it's a moment of authenticity. So I teach people how to have spontaneous inspired action. And that is way more profound than extrinsically motivated actions. When a mother sees her son and he's playing video games and she says, "Johnny, did you do your homework?" No. He says, "Well, you can't play the game until you finish the homework." He goes, he's upset. He was procrastinating, hesitating, and frustrating on the homework. But then she says, if you don't do it, you'll be punished by not being able to play the game. But once you do it, you get to play the game. So she'll put extrinsic motivation on there to get him to do the homework, and then he can play his game. But he spontaneously plays the game. He spontaneously, whatever's highest on your value, you spontaneously act upon. Whatever's low on your values, you need rewards and punishment on. So extrinsic motivation is never as powerful as intrinsic motivation for long term. Short term, it can be useful. But anytime you train people with external motivations to override intrinsic motivations, you actually undermine the potential for that individual to be self-sufficient. They actually require external motivation, and then hedonic adaptation occurs, and the thing that you give them pleasure, they need more. So they go, well, you need to pay me more to do it. And they get desensitized from the pain. And so eventually those don't work, and you have to keep accentuating that, and it's unproductive. That's why companies with extrinsic motivation aren't competitive as much as people that have intrinsically engaged individuals that are inspired to do what they love. So spontaneous potentials in the brain occur when you're congruent, and evoked potentials occur when you're living in lower values and you needed stimuluses and responses.
Thank you. Are there any people who don't have any type of values at all?
Are there people without values? No. You wouldn't move a muscle. You wouldn't move at all unless you perceive there was some more advantage and disadvantage to some value system. Value systems are byproducts of seek and avoid. And a single-celled organism has a value system. It has, this is tonic, this is toxic, this is food, this is waste, this is prey, this is predator. So it's automatically making an assessment based on some sort of stimuli, and it's moving, and it has a value system. If it's food, it's good, and if it's a predator, it's bad. You know, it's a moral construct even in a cell. So humans have those things, and there's no way they can be moving a muscle at all. The only time they don't have a value system and they've transcended it is in a state of grace, when they're absolutely in a state where they're speechless, they're emotionless, they're in a state of awe, they can't even speak, can't even move a muscle. They're just in awe with tears in their eyes. In that moment, you've transcended voids and values temporarily.
What shall one do when they feel that they don't belong to this world?
what does an individual do when they don't feel they belong to this world? They stop smoking something, whatever they're smoking, or taking something that they're taking probably. They're in a dissociated state. They're usually having something in this world that they expect to give them more advantage and disadvantage. It doesn't. They're pained by it, and they're wanting to dissociate from this world. And they probably have a fantasy that there's something outside this world that's more going to give them more fulfillment and more pleasure, and that's a dissociation. And if we go back to the trauma that initiates this and neutralize the trauma, they come back and they ground themselves back and appreciate the world. This is the best place I found to hang out. If there was a better world that I'd go, I'd be doing seminars there. But so far, this is the best one I found to do seminars on. So people create fantasies, and they can create delusions in their mind about how the world should be. You know, depression is a comparison of your current reality to a fantasy that you're holding on to. If you're depressed and hate this world and want to escape it, it's because somehow you're having an unrealistic expectation of what the world is offering you. And you have a delusion that either people are supposed to live in your values, you're supposed to live in other people's values, you're supposed to get one-sided people, one-sided world, one-sided outcomes. And this makes you not appreciate life, because life's got both sides.
How should I manage the relationship with my mom if she's trying to control me? Was one of the questions.
If your mom is trying to control you, just know whenever you do things that challenge her values, she's going to want to constrain you. And anytime you do something supporting her values, she'll give you freedom. If you're a teenage girl and you come home and you say, Daddy, 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 I got to be prom queen. I got honor roll. I got president of the school society system. And I've got a scholarship. Can I borrow the car? He'll say, sure. I'm proud of you, right? Because he's going to take credit. That's why he's saying I'm proud of you. He's taking credit for what your outcome is. And you're supporting his values. He lacks the rules on you. But if you say, Daddy, 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 I'm pregnant, and I have no idea who it is. I was with about a bunch of men last night, and I was doing drugs, and I used your credit card to buy them, and the police are now looking for your credit card, and I used your car, and they're chasing your car, so that the police may come to your house. Dad, can I borrow the car? So he'll probably say, no, out of the house. So anytime you're challenged, you constrain the rules, you tighten the rules. Anytime you support, you lax the rules. And this is in the market cycle, you see this. When the market's booming, they lax all the rules, and the banks are freed, and people start doing foolish stuff. And then when things go down, then everybody puts constraints on there again. So this is a human behavior on a social scale and also an individual scale. So if you are constrained by your mom and it's somehow in her perception, you're doing things that go against her values and challenging it. I would find out what her values are, find out how what you're doing, how it can help her values, and communicate in a way that's helping her values for one. And then realizing that she has her set of values. She may need a lesson in her life too. And if she's going to try to project that on you, you may have to say, Mom, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. I will consider it, but I'm going to make my own decisions because you want me to be grown up. And I'd tactfully find a way of being able to say that. My mom wanted me to come by. She lived in a small little town outside a big city, and I was hardly there. I was traveling around the world. And so I told her, I said, Mom, you want me to hang out here, but you also want me to be out and achieving my goals. So which one is more important? Hanging out here and never getting my goals done, or getting my goals done? What would you have preferred when you were my age? And I put it in that context. She goes, I said, I would rather get technology to come in and get us on Skype and get us on the internet and set that up for you. So no matter where I am in the world, I can share my experiences and where I'm at with you, because you love to travel vicariously through me. And I could come in and I could chat with you for a few minutes on a daily basis. But I can't come into this one town and just stay at this one town all the time. It's not functional, not real. And I don't want to resent you by that demand, because I'll just be here and not really be here. So it'd be wiser for me to go and use this technology. And I communicate with her and make her where she gets what she wants in a way where I'm getting what I want. That's the art of mastery.
What do you think about the big age gap between two partners?
Well, statistically, most relationships that have had duration, they've done some correlations on relationships, and the ones that are usually longer are usually ones closer. It doesn't mean that there's not long ones that are farther apart, because I've certainly seen them. But statistically, if they're within 2 years of each other, they typically have a longer path. There's a bell curve to it. And the farther they get away, the less likely. But there's always exceptions. There's always people that do. I've met people that have been, they're 25, 30 years difference. They have a fantastic relationship. So I don't want to say that it just means there may be more work because it's a different generation. They grew up in a different era. They have different ways of communicating. If you care enough to find out what's important to the person you're with, the individual you're with, find out what their values are and can articulate what you value in terms of where they feel they're getting their values met, the relationship's fine, regardless of age. But if you can't relate to it and you're self-righteously think they need to be more like me and they think you need to be more like them, well, you're going to divide the relationship up and it's not probably going to last. So make sure that there's some compatibility. Anytime you're minimizing yourself to somebody and you're infatuated with them and are afraid to say negative things to them for fear of loss of them, you have an infatuation and you're the underdog. And anytime you're to exaggerate yourself and afraid to say the positives to them, to mislead them, and want to keep your options open, you're negating them and you don't have a really quality match. But if you both can banter with each other and have a dialogue with each other and hold each other accountable and there's a nice balance of positives and negatives, there's respect. And as long as that's going on, the relationship can sustain itself, regardless of the age difference. I had a gentleman and his wife that I met in San Diego, California at a restaurant. He was 72, she was 19.
Oh.
Now, when I first heard I was going to have dinner with them, I was going, whoa, this ought to be an interesting night. And I was thinking, what is this, a sugar daddy relationship, a hot chick and a old buzzard with money or something? I had all these assumptions. And then I got to meet with him, and he was a professor in anthropology, and she was one of the most ingenious students in anthropology. And they connected on anthropology. And he wanted to have a young daughter in his life. He never had a daughter. So he was getting a daughter and a wife with this very brilliant young 19-year-old. I mean, if I would have closed my eyes and didn't look at her and just listened to her conversation, I would have thought 50s.
Wow.
And when I chatted with him, he was as vibrant as a teenager. So I saw, my first impression was like, whoa, this is interesting. This is a grandpa dynamic. And then when I got to actually spend the evening with him, I realized all of my preconceived idea was thrown out the window. And I realized, okay, what can I say? They connected in the field of anthropology, and the voids he had in his life and the voids she had in her life came together. Her need for a grandfather figure, his need for a granddaughter were there, and their connection in anthropology. So I saw that, and I didn't see it as their physical form. I saw them on two, conscious beings connecting. And as far as I know, they're still together. So he's probably 90 now. I think she stayed with him all the way through. So what can I say?
Are there any situations or traumas you have that you didn't heal yet?
Are there any traumas that I haven't healed? If I'm conscious of them and I feel that they're intrusive and distracting me or interfering with my life, I take the time to go through and use my method on it to dissolve it. So if I have some, I'm either not aware of them, because I would work on them if I had something that I was aware of. So I don't think so. But I'm sure there's something that I may not be conscious of. That's very probable. If I look at some of my behaviors, probably other people can see it easier than I can possibly see it. But if I'm aware of it, I work on it. So I don't have anything that's on my conscious mind. I always say that anything you can't say thank you for is baggage. I could go through my life and scan through there, and I don't see anything that I would have any different. There's nothing to fix there. I don't see anything that I need to fix back there, or wish they were different. A lot of people have regrets in life. I don't have any regrets. Then people say, you have no problem talking about that? I said, no. Why would I have a difficulty talking about that I lived on the streets, or I did drugs, or I did this, or whatever? They said, what about your parents? I said, in my perception, I had some amazing parents. My sister had a different view, but she had a different life. In my perception, I had pretty good parents, and I wouldn't change anything in my life. It's been pretty amazing life. I really feel like I've had a blessed life. So
Great.
If I'm aware of it, I work on it. If I'm not aware of it, and right now I'm not aware of anything that's major trauma back there that I need to go fix or anything.
Thank you. What do you do when you get angry or annoyed?
I think I have a whole spectrum of responses depending on the situation. Sometimes I get really angry and I react, and then I discover what my reaction is, and I pull out my method afterwards, and I start working on my illusion. Sometimes I start to see both sides of it pretty quick without having to formally do it. Sometimes I go on and on and on and run my story for hours. I have a whole spectrum. So I can't say that I have only one response to things that provoke a response. It's all based on my perception and my expectation. So I either adjust my expectation or adjust my perception to bring it back. I had somebody recently request something that I thought was unreasonable, and I firmly said, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not allowing that. And they said, well, and they tried to rebut, and they tried to defend it, and I stood my ground. And I was frustrated by them attempting to do that because I didn't feel that it was not reasonable to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, your reasons for it being done don't seem reasonable to me, so I'm going to stand my ground until you present something that makes sense. And it doesn't make sense to me why you're asking for this. So I was frustrated by them pushing and trying to push without rationale, without just entitlement instead of reason. And I then explained that, you know, when you're asking for something, make sure that you do something that earns that position, that opportunity. And if you present that, and I recognize it, and you get it across to me in my value system, you'll get your outcome. So try again. Don't give up, but don't keep pushing the same thing, or you're just going to get the same answer. So I got frustrated by that. I got angry by that. I realized my role in that. I was realizing who was doing the opposite. I was chuckling when I discovered who it was and saw the opposite, because I had a bunch of fans that were doing the opposite and humble. And this person was actually getting me back down. But at the same time, it's a lesson for everybody involved. Everybody's learning how to be authentic in the process. So I have moments where I react and then I think. I have systems, one, quick response, survival responses, and then I come back and use my reason and override it, neutralize it, and go on.
Great, thank you.
Full spectrum.
Do you watch movies?
Do I watch movies? Yes, I do. I would say probably, for many years I didn't watch hardly any. I would say then when I was with my wife, who passed away, she liked going to movies, if possible, when we were together, at least one day out of the week, we would go and have one or two movies. I probably watch a movie between every month or every quarter, I'd say on average. Once a month, once a quarter, I'll see a movie. And when I'm on a plane, I'll sometimes see a movie while I'm eating. I'll do it while I'm eating because I like to work. And while I'm eating, I might as well eat and see something. So I'll try to select something that's meaningful. And because I've got an alter ego that wants to be James Bond, I like James Bond. No, I'm teasing. It's not always James Bond.
What are the actions you spend the most time on or with?
What actions do I spend most of my time? Unquestionably, if you were to put a drone over me and watch me for 24 hours a day for, say, 6 months, the thing that would stand out most is I would be teaching. Spending time sharing, teaching ideas, principles, methods with people through whatever vehicle, radio, television, newspaper, magazines, seminars, webcasts, keynote speeches, any possible writing article, whatever it may be. I spend most of my time teaching. That's definitely at the top. The second most would be researching and writing. And I'm traveling, as we are right now. I travel, so I full-time travel around the world. I'm either on a plane or on my ship. And I'm constantly traveling. So teach, research, write, travel. Those are the absolute top of the lines. My eating is usually, when I'm by myself and I'm not socializing, my eating is probably 15 to 18 minutes per meal.
Wow.
And sometimes I'm actually having room service and having it right there where I can eat while I'm working. So I don't have to be distracted by it. So I can chew and type. So I don't like to distract myself from what I love doing, which is teach, research, and write.
Thank you.